New York City Justice Corps aims to shift the relationships between justice-involved young adults and the communities in which they live. This goal is rooted in two essential beliefs: that young adults have tremendous energy and creativity to contribute to their neighbors, and that young people deserve a second chance after a mistake. Our young people want this second chance. All Justice Corps members have been involved in the justice system. They're on parole or probation, referred by alternative to incarceration programs or specialized courts, or had a recent arrest. So they're all in this crucial time of transition. As one Corps member told us, coming out of prison, he felt it was time to get his life together, and Justice Corps was a start. But that desire for change can be undermined when the reentry process throws too many obstacles in the way. Young adults with criminal records face barriers to housing, education, and employment. And the barriers to rejoining community life may be the most painful. Our young people know their neighbors are watching, and as one Corps member told us in a focus group, that when they get back, the neighbors want to see what you're going to do. Are you going to be the same person, or are you going to make changes? The changes in behavior and thinking patterns that we ask young people to make are not easy. Corps members can start down a path toward change, get stuck, and need to start again. I want to tell you about a Corps member whose story is in the report. John enrolled in Justice Corps, but then was stabbed and almost died in a gang-related fight. He had to drop out of the program until he recovered enough to re-enroll in a later cohort. Then, John was devastated by the loss of a friend. The loss prompted him to decide to commit to changing his life and making the most of his time in Justice Corps. He ended his gang involvement and graduated Justice Corps, ready to find a job. He began working at a moving company. It took him 2 tries to make it through the program, but he did. Young people like John need a program that's ready to take them back when they're ready. They need a chance to show their neighbors that, yes, they are making changes. The report you have in your hands today tells the story of young people coming back to give back, the story of how community benefit projects make a difference in the lives of Corps members and at the same time create lasting benefits for community organizations, parks and gardens, the churches, all of the community places that invite Corps members in to do their service projects.
Because just like what Elena alluded to earlier, is that no matter where we go, especially if you just came out of the juvenile system, you always feel trapped. You always feel underneath the system's foot and with their foot right on your throats. But with a program like this, they've really given you the confidence and the tools that we need to be unstoppable and to really get out there and get back on track. Because everybody deserves a chance after a mistake.
One famous rite of passage that people talk about, and it's a tragic one, has become going to prison. They start to internalize this sense of, well, this is who I am. This is I must really be an offender at the end of the day, and taking on that, internalizing that stigma in their own sense of who they are. The question for me, as somebody who's interested in desistance, is, do these same processes work in reverse? Can we utilize these same processes to create citizens that we use to create offenders, to create academics, to create priests, and the like? Justice Corps stands as a kind of perfect experimental test of precisely these principles, and as you see in the report, they draw on many of these very ideas and the work that you all do. Rather than trying to say, we're going to change them, we're going to find the flaws in these people, we're going to find what's happened in their relationship with the communities, and that's what we're going to work on.
If the community that cares about what's happening, is concerned about making these kinds of changes, wants to see that transcend past the walls of incarceration, we have to insist and demand that that happens. It's not always a question, I don't think, of being solved within the court system. I think that's the last, unfortunately, that's the last stop, and that's not where we want to be. Let's look before we get to the court system in terms of community partnership, and the best way to do that is when you walk through your community and say, well, what needs to happen? You're now engaging with young people, older people, the most vulnerable of your community. You're now a stakeholder.
We have this 2 firm beliefs. One, if you make a mistake, you should have another opportunity, again, as Lori said. But also where you're born or your early circumstances in life should not determine where you end up, and those are core sort of values to the programs that we operate.
There has to be restoration. I don't call it reentry, I call it restoration. Reentry to me is too passive. That puts the onus on the individual to figure out their way back into society. I think it's our job as community to restore these young people back to a life course of accomplishment and achievement and outcome.
When we came together, of course, everybody has their own thoughts. But I will say that for us, we welcome the young people in, like the gentleman said, young man said. We welcome them in. And then the older people begin to say, these are our children. The bottom line for me, though, is that the Justice Corps created an atmosphere where transformation could happen for both the young person and for us as a community entity.
The involvement in the community benefits projects, from the mapping process, where they are actually assessing their own community's needs, to the process where they're actually presenting the proposed projects to a board of community members, community leaders, community stakeholders, and presenting a compelling argument, trying to make the case for something, advocating actively for something that they've chosen they want to pursue. I think that begins to fundamentally shift their relationship with that community. It begins to create a sense of belonging, a sense of ownership. And I think that the community benefits projects in particular are a critical step in that process, because it begins to let core members see themselves differently, and it helps others begin to see them differently.
It kind of reopened the door to what we were doing, was giving the youth a place to express themselves.
We're building a sense of value, the value that they always had. We've always valued them. How we're in a way, in a sense, sort of restoring the value to the communities through these young folks.
Everyone wants to give and wants to be constructive. And if you create opportunities for people to be creative and constructive, it blows you away. You know, because every day when these guys came in, it's the one thing that struck me was how optimistic they were, how happy they were to be there.
The youth have to be taught to respect females, respect themselves, and to dream for something. And in order for everything to work out, we just got to come together and really have serious conversations on how to fix these issues before we can fix the overall system.
How do you define a community that has low rates of violence? It's a community that has high collective efficacy. And what do we think about, what do we know about collective efficacy? There's a number of pieces to that. One of them is a community that cares for its young people, and where not just your own sort of flesh and blood young people, but cares about your neighbor's young people, or the people coming up in your church or whatever. So that, if people care that way, that means there's lower rates of violence. It's fascinating research. But the second one that you just described is a community where neighbors respect each other and are engaged in mutual exchanges to do things for each other. That is also high collective efficacy. That community also has low rates of violence. So what you're talking about here is how do you create a community that's efficacious, that works?
Self-governance, I feel, is key in our communities. We need to grab our young people by the horns from when they're, when they're young. A great example I have, I remember, to share a quick story with you guys. One night, we heard something in our garage. So my dad ran down there, and he actually saw one kid. It was two of them, but one ran off, and they were breaking into a garage trying to steal like these mongoose bikes that my brother had. My dad brought the kid inside, and this kid is like so terrified of what's gonna happen. And he sat there with this kid in the living room for almost 2 hours, just like questioning, why are you doing this? Where your parents? It's 2 o'clock in the morning. He's like, somebody else will call the police on you. Long story short, this is like 15 years later. This kid and my father is like my father's 6th son. He just bought a house in Jersey. My father had a tractor trailer company. He taught him how to drive a tractor trailer. He got a CDL license. But this is just an example of us taking back our community.
Dr. Christie has this wonderful saying, which I hope I've gotten it right, I've used it for years, that the problem with the criminal justice system, this is really profound, I think, is that it has stolen our conflicts from us. So think about that. These are things that happen in life, with relationships, families, whatever, are conflicts. And we work these things through, and we become stronger because we work them through. The criminal justice system takes those things and puts them into some other track, and it undermines exactly what you were just talking about, sort of the notion of efficacy, that there are things that we have to work. What your dad did was to say, there's a conflict. I'm not just going to call the cops. I've got to deal with it. And what a fabulous story that is. And the ending is great. But he didn't just say, there's a system that will take care of this young man, right? So see the difference? It has stolen our conflicts from us. We need to claim them back.
I wanted to disassociate myself with that offender and that title that comes with that criminal background. So now, upon coming to Justice Corps, it kind of gave me a newfound dignity, and I was able to reestablish myself and cultivate myself into a functioning human being. And now I got myself in a place where I'm not only comfortable, but I'm proud, and I'm able to say, oh, yo, look, I did this. Look, I worked on this. When I travel around, when I'm going around the Bronx with my family, I say, oh, yeah, we worked on this church at my job where I did this with these youth. I did this when I was in this cohort. You know, it's something proud, and it gives me a newfound, like, pride.
And we see it. We see it.